Good evening, everyone. We ask for questions to be submitted to us to ask the presiding bishop. So we collated all the questions and we kind of put them in different categories. So we will start.
Easy. Is that where we're going to start? I didn't know.
You're the presiding bishop, okay? There's nothing easy.
Nothing easy. How did you know?
The purple shirt. Okay. All right. The questions now are the first questions are gonna be on race and culture. First question. Any suggestions with dealing with being a person of color in congregations that are really white?
Well, let's just go right to it. Wow.
Wasn't my question.
Well, that's a good one. But can I just say thank you?
Please.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to Bishop Diana. Thank you for, I don't know how many times we've postponed these. I told her coming in, I feel like Godot. Remember that book, Waiting for Godot? I mean, I feel like Godot, like, eventually he'll show up or something. But I am so glad to be here. I don't care if it's hazy outside. I don't care if it's snowing outside. Does it snow here? I don't know whether it does. Oh, it does? Don't care. I was determined to get here. I was going to be here this time. So thank you for coming out, and it's just a real privilege to
Well, we're glad to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, well, everybody needs community. And community comes in a variety of ways. And there are times when it's helpful to be able to be with folk who share some of your life experiences. You don't have to be there all the time, but there are times when it's just helpful to be with folk who you don't actually have to explain what you mean. You know what I mean? And I mean, that's true, whether you're black, white, it's true whether you're in a particular ethnic group or, I mean, that's just normal. That's human being. And so we need that. And when I was Bishop of North Carolina, I mean, it was really terrible. My wife would say when I come back in the evening after having driven and do visitation, done confirmation, and she would say, well, how many people of color were there today? I said that room was thoroughly integrated and diverse. She said, beside you, how many people were... I said, I count for a multitude of people. I thought it was and yet that was really true. It was very often, I was the only person of color, not all the time, but very often, the only person of color that was in the room. And it was sort of funny, having grown up in old black communities when I was a kid, it was sort of a transition, and I had been the priest at historically black congregations up until I was elected Bishop of North Carolina. So in many respects, that was a new experience as a priest, not as a student or any of that, but certainly as a priest. And so I would intentionally go to things like UBE when there were things going on, or black clergy events and that kind of thing, and was pretty intentional about that, just to kind of stay connected. And I would go over to St. Augustine's University now, is there in Raleigh, which is one of our historically black colleges. And so I would go over there and just sort of assist in a class and just be with the chaplain and go around and do things on the campus. And I went to see the other campuses too, but I would deliberately go there just to sort of get immersed. And I would sometimes come home and say, okay, I've had enough. I'm going back. But I think you just have to be intentional about finding ways to connect with the community that shares your experiences, however that happens. Now, I don't know whether it's for a sorority or whether it's some way that taps you into those roots. You don't have to live there all the time, but some way that connects you. And I think that's going to more and more be the case. I think, if the American experiment in the E pluribus unum from many one grows and develops over time, there's signs of hope and signs of not hope, and it's all mixed in together. It's not all good, it's not all bad. It's a mix. But I do think at the heart of the American experiment, and maybe more importantly, at the heart of the God experiment in humanity, there is an intention for there to be real diversity and for us to figure out the chemistry of how to live together with integrity, not to shed our identity, to embrace it and lift each other up.
Yeah.
And yet to be able to call your tribe, call your name, acknowledge your people, whoever they are. Be thankful for them. And, if your family's like my family, there's some things you're thankful for and some things we just don't need to talk about. But be thankful. Call your tribe. I used to tell people all the time when I was Bishop of North Carolina, be proud of who you are.
Yes.
Thank the Lord, because that's who you are. For good or bad, that's who you are. Or as the old folks would say, that's who you be. And if that's who you are, then find ways to celebrate and live into that, as well as find ways to be part of the greater whole of the humanity that God has created us. And it takes work. It takes work, but it can be done.
Thank you. Okay, next question. What does it mean to be neighbors to those who, even indirectly, participate in the displacement of your communities through gentrification?
Don't y'all want to know what my favorite football team is or something like that? I mean, Lord have mercy.
We
Yeah.
waited this long, Bishop.
You're
getting the
Did we
easy-
come this far
That's
by
by
faith?
faith.
Well, I can only speak from the experience that I've had. I can't
Okay.
speak from the perspective of your experience, and that would be fascinating to hear more. But I think I know where that. We have churches in the Episcopal Church that were historically black, and I don't want to say just African American because sometimes they were Caribbean, African, as well as African American, so it
Right.
could be a mix of peoples of color.
Right.
And they were that when that neighborhood was predominantly black. The three congregations where I was the priest, the vicar and rector, were all historically black congregations, and the neighborhoods where they were at one time were all black neighborhoods. Now that was in another day, and at least in one case, the church I had in Baltimore, the neighborhood around it is regentrifying or gentrifying. That is the case. Fortunately or unfortunately, I got elected Bishop of North Carolina, so I never had the opportunity to finish what I had planned to do. But a friend of mine, Barney Farnham, had retired from the Episcopal Church about 10 blocks east of us, which was in a predominantly white neighborhood. And Barney and Suzanne came and they became part of St. James. And I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to mix this congregation up. Now, our identity is as a historic African American congregation, or black congregation in that case. But that doesn't mean we stay that way. We can diversify. You see, we can diversify, and so, but we never deny our heritage and never pretend that we never had it. You see it getting that? And so when you find ways to actually lift everybody up, because I told the vestry, I said, if y'all got a problem with this, you know money is all green. And then that's when I got amens out of the vestry. They said, we got religion now. You understand? But the truth is, if you find ways to lift everybody up and make sure that you're not inadvertently displacing anyone. I'm talking about churches now. You know about neighborhoods. That's another issue. Not dispersing anyone or their heritage. You have to be intentional about it. It just doesn't happen. You have to work at it. You can find ways to make it possible. A little church in Wilson, North Carolina. I don't know if anybody knows. I think I've lost it. Wilson, North Carolina. It's a little town. Got some of the best barbecue in the state of North Carolina. Thank you. And St. Mark's Wilson was a historically black congregation that was founded in the days of Jim Crow segregation. And so there were two churches in the town, St. Timothy's and St. Wilson. St. Timothy's was the historically white congregation. St. Mark's historically black. Well, the St. Mark's was dwindling in size as people were aging and dying. The neighborhood wasn't regentrifying in the classic way. The neighborhood was slowly but surely becoming Hispanic, Latino. And if you go to St. Mark's today, you will see an Afro-Latino church that affirms the heritage of the peoples who are in that church. Now, they do multiple services, and that's one way to do it, and then they periodically have things when they do them together. But I know another church very similar in Oxford, North Carolina, where they're same, all over the South you have these Episcopal churches, where there's a white Episcopal church and a black one in little bitty towns. And they all date from just after Reconstruction, when Jim Crow rose up. And in that one as well, they've decided they're going to learn to worship together every Sunday. We're going to be Pentecostal Episcopalians. What happened on Pentecost is going to happen here every Sunday. We're going to speak English and Spanish, and we all going to understand the gospel together. And we're going to work together to do this. So they have a multilingual service every Sunday. The other congregation doesn't slightly, but the point is, in each case, they're lifting up their heritages, lifting them up together, and being truly diverse. That doesn't mean anybody gets obliterated. It means all get celebrated. That's what you see. If you look in the Bible, if you look at what heaven's like, in the book of Revelation, I think it's in chapter 7 of Chuck Robertson back there on my staff. His doctorate's in New Testament, so I have to be careful. But I'm pretty sure in that one, in the vision, he says, I see many people from many tribes and many nations. Doesn't say they're the same. Many tribes and many nations. Different peoples. That diversity and variety is lifted up into heaven before the throne of God. Well, if that's what heaven looks like, then heaven on earth ought to look the same way. And I think that's how we help our churches to grow and develop authentic to their heritage, but truly diverse in terms of the people who are there. And when that happens, then God's going to do something. It is hard work. I mean, it is hard work. I don't want to pretend that it's not. But if we can't do it in the church, no need in thinking that the country can do it.
Amen to that.
Right? So that's where we can make a witness that it can be done. And I actually believe it can be.
Okay, final hard question.
Oh, okay, good.
How do you respond to the argument that because conversations around race are politically divisive, the church ought not to address them? Is it appropriate to address politically based laws and hate-filled rhetoric that stoke the fire of racism?
Well, apparently not. You know, one of the things I learned, and I'm still learning, when I was Bishop of North Carolina, and I was Bishop of a diocese that, well, we used to joke and say that the majority of the laity were Republicans and Democrats. Now, that was actually, there was probably a lot of truth. Actually, there was a lot of truth to that. There was a lot of truth to that. But it was a mix of people. I mean, it was a real diverse in terms of the politics. I mean, we didn't have real far right-wing people. But we did have conservative, traditionalist people in terms of their politics. But when we talked about race or other subject matters, we always approached it, and I insisted we must always approach it from the perspective of the gospel. What does Jesus call us to do? I'm asking you about sociologists right now. What does Jesus call us to do? So let's work with the scriptures. Let's work with Galatians chapter 3. All who have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is therefore no more male or female, slave nor free, Jew or Gentile. Let's approach this the way Jesus did. Go make disciples of all nations. All ethnoi, actually, is all ethnoi. So let's approach Jesus. When I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all folk, all kinds of folk unto me. You know, if we approach it from that perspective, how do we live into that vision in a context where there's racial division? You see what I mean? Let's apply the tenets of our faith to race or anything else that's controversy. I'm not saying that the Bible answers all the questions, but it will give us guidance on the spirit with which we engage those questions. And when we do that, you never know. And I can honestly say that when I was bishop in North Carolina, it wasn't all hunky-dory, so don't misunderstand me. But toward the last few years, before I was elected presiding bishop, William Barber, who I don't know if you know, Bishop Barber. Oh, okay. Bishop Barber, he's from North Carolina. He's from Greenville. Anyway, he got moving, and the Moral Monday movement got going, and it was occasioned by some profoundly egregious, immoral pieces of legislation that were being passed and promulgated in the state legislature. I mean, just ridiculous kinds of things that were just hurtful and harmful. Everything from refusing to accept Medicare supplements and Medicaid supplements, refusal to accept anything that had to do with Obamacare, just consistently things, refusal to accept government funding, supplemental funding for education, which meant poor children weren't going to get. Now, I didn't come at that from a political angle. I came at that public policy, for those of us who are Christian, must always be consistent with what Jesus taught us in what we call the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If I wouldn't want legislation that does to somebody else what, if I don't want it to happen to my children, why would I want it to happen to somebody else's children? It's that simple. This is common sense. And so I remember writing the letter very carefully, and Bishop Ann Hodges-Copper, you know Ann, we worked it. She's a little bit more fiery than I am. I tended to speak. Now,
what?
Yeah, but we worked together and communicated. And do you know, Republicans and Democrats said, this is right. We don't believe in anything that hurts other people. They did. Now, they did. Now, I'd been there a long time. I had been the bishop there a long time. It takes a while. You got to get some street cred. But had been there, a while. But people understood just human decency and compassion, that the Jesus who calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves, he was serious about that. So what does that look like in our public policy? What does that look like about immigration? What does that look like? Back then it was LGBTQ folk. What does that look like? In North Carolina, we're in the South. What does that look like here? How are we going to treat other people? We want somebody else to treat your children that way or your family that way? Don't do to somebody else what you don't want to happen to yourself. That's you. Jesus was actually telling us how to be authentically and genuinely human as God dreams and intends for us. And now, everybody didn't agree, trust me. I'll tell you a story after, this was after Bishop Robinson had been consecrated and I'd given consent and all of that. And there was a lot of brouhaha about that. I wasn't the most popular bishop around. In fact, it had been, jokingly, they heard somebody say that, when you first became bishop, people believed you could walk on water, you could do anything. And then once you gave consent to Bishop Robinson, people said, that man can't even swim. So he had been there. So one day, my youngest daughter and one of her friends were in the backseat of the car. We were going somewhere. And I stopped by Dawson's house to pick something up. And her daughter said, can we go in so we can see your hate mail? So it wasn't all hunky-dory, believe me. But I do believe that when we call and invite others to our higher nature, what St. Paul calls the spirit, not the flesh, to our higher nature, invite folk there and say, let's work together there. It doesn't mean we're always going to agree, but we're probably going to end up in a better place working from there than we would if we start in my lower nature of just my self-interest, what I want or what my group wants. And it doesn't work all the time. I know that. I've been around the barn. But it works a lot of the time, and I think it works more often than not. I've forgotten what the original question was, but I enjoyed answering it.
Okay, I'm giving you a softball here.
Softball? Okay.
How do we foster spiritual well-being in a time of heightened cultural antagonism? How do we remain engaged in the world when we feel powerless or exhausted?
Let me say it this way, and I mean more than what it's going to sound like. Got to go to church. What I mean by that, you got to go to the well. Remember the Samaritan woman
Yeah.
and Jesus, that conversation in John 4? And she was in a world of turmoil. And Jesus invited her to deep waters. Old slaves used to sing the song, Deep River. My home is over Jordan, Lord. I want to cross over to campground.
Yeah.
That I think we've got to continually go back to the well. That's what I mean by going to church. And the well is that wellspring of life, those waters welling up into eternal life. And that's what gathering to actually worship God in community, gathering to really pray, gathering to sing the songs of Zion, gathering to hold each other up when we need to be held up, and holding us to accountability when we need to be held to accountability. That all of that is going to the well, going to church, going to whatever those ways or means that draw us closer and closer to the Lord. Because the strength is from God. Y'all remember that Broadway show, Your Arms Are Too Short to Box with God?
Yeah.
You got to go to the well. No need in fighting. Go to the well. And there is the strength for living.
Okay. Going back to another hard one.
Oh.
I'm gonna. This is a question, but I'm gonna rephrase it in. How do you move from highly intellectual congregations and conversations where you acquire knowledge through reading books and taking classes, but there's no transition from the head to the heart?
Well,
Going to the well. How do we
yeah, how
get to
do
the
you
well?
get to the well?
Yeah.
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 I believe in, I haven't been able to do it as much as a presiding bishop, because it's a very different job. So, I really believe in the kind of Bible study and prayer group where human life and divine grace meet. So that, I mean, when I would do Bible studies, and I didn't do a whole lot of talking, we take that passage and say, now what's going on here? So what do you think was going on with what was happening with that sister at the well? What's really going on? And let's talk about that. Is that an experience anybody here? And let's talk about it. Bring human experience, real life into the room. Not just intellectual. Nothing wrong with intellectual. Don't misunderstand me. But bring our human experience and take it to where the Word is, and let the Word become flesh and dwell among us. And when that happens, you move from periphery to the center of our lives. And that's the kind of, and there are, all sorts of study materials and all sorts of things that actually are designed to do that. And they are much more readily available. A lot of them are online, to be honest. A lot of that kind of stuff is online. Some of them, I'm not doing a commercial for the Episcopal Church webpage, but there's a whole bunch of stuff there under the way of love. And they're putting more stuff out. Some of it's cerebral stuff, but a lot of it is about how do you move from head to heart and from heart to head, head to heart. It's got to be, it's like that. It's like the prayer of what is it? Call it for purity. Almighty God, to whom all hearts are open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid.
Yeah.
What cleansed check this out, thoughts of our hearts.
By the inspiration
Of
your
the Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify the holy name. You see them getting, so right there, you've got to cleanse the thoughts of our hearts. It's the whole thing. But if you don't understand the colic for purity, somebody knows Billie Holiday used to sing it this way: all of me, why not take all of me? Can't you see I'm no good without you? That bring the whole self before the throne, before God's grace. And I think doing that in whether it's a prayer group or a Bible study group or even a study group around a book, that actually, move the intellectual conversation to the experiential conversation, and it will go back and forth. And in time, I think you find that folks start talking, it gets, as they say, it gets real. And groups that stay together for a little while, you get to know each other too, and things happen in life. Things just happen in life. I think ask questions of the heart. What are the thoughts of our hearts? What are the question of the heart, as well as the question of the head? I don't know if you got C.S. Lewis. He was certainly about as intellectual as, I would think he would count as a serious, and an English intellectual is like, that's serious head stuff. Trust me. That is some serious head stuff. And he was, and he kind of intellectually found his way into being, first a theist, as he said, someone who believed in the existence of God intellectually, to then sort of, it moved beyond just an intellectual thought to a personal assent. And he wrote a book about part of that journey, and he called it Surprised by Joy. That's where he moved from head to heart, and then got the thoughts of the heart. And he was there. And he actually married, part of the story is he married a woman who helped that brother find his heart. Let me tell you, he really did. And so I think that's the journey we have to help folk on. Let's talk about, how's that? Anybody in this room had that experience or something like that? Or does this connect to anybody? No, if you get the saints in church telling the truth, you won't get to the heart, get to life. And it can happen. But it becomes a discipline of just doing it over and over and over again.
Okay. We'll take a break from my questions, and I would like to invite members of the congregation, if they have any questions that have not touched on the topic that we've already touched on that they want to ask the bishop. If you would raise your hand, we'll have somebody come to you with a microphone.
We got the mic.
Anybody? Yes, Jackie.
How do you see the role of a deacon in this transition from where we are to where we want to be?
If you could say who you are when you ask the question, please.
I'm Jackie Martinez. I'm a deacon for
guessed that.
Yes.
for St. John the Divine in Springfield. And I am the first Latina deacon to be ordained in this diocese.
Wow. Awesome.
Vocational deacon.
Yes. I've been blessed every church. Every church where I've been, I hate to think, all the churches where I've served, I've always served with a deacon. I hadn't thought about that till just now, but actually I have been. That's been a particular blessing, and each one's been different. They've been different people over the years. But I'm coming to see that the role of deacon, and Bishop Diana may remember this, I can't remember when it was, in one of the sermons I did with the House of Bishops, I've not done it anywhere else, and I don't remember the text or any of that, but I said, the place where we often neglect, but that may be critical in our time, is that place in kind of classical church architecture that's called the narthex. It's the crossing place. It's that place between the door that goes out into the world and the door that goes into what we often call the saint. It's that betwixt and between place. It's the crossing. It's the real crossing is not up like we sometimes say. That's the real crossing, both coming into the church and going out from it into the world. I think our deacons have been ordained to dwell in the narthex. And when they see us coming in the direction of it, to help us stay there. Go into the church for worship. Go into the church in word and sacrament to be fed and nurtured. And go out into the world to bear witness to that Jesus we've met in church in the world. Deacons are, okay, now let's hang out in this narthex a little bit. And go, deacons are narthex people. And I think that's why in the prayer book, deacons typically are the people who do the dismissal. That sends us out, let us go forth in the name of Christ, and that kind of thing. I think, I mean, I'm guessing, I don't really know, but I'm guessing, well, no, I'll say that with authority, yes, that's exactly what, but it makes some sense because actually deacons, I used to say to our deacons in North Carolina, I used to say, deacons are people who are hard to dismiss. It's easy to dismiss those of us who are priests because, well, you're on the payroll. You gotta be, I mean, you're paid to be a Christian, so to speak. I mean, you know what I mean? It's easy. Deacon's a little bit harder because a deacon actually works just like everybody else in the world, in that church. A deacon's got, I mean, not the clergy don't have the same issues, but, you got priests in another mindset, if you will. But deacons, they are teachers, they are physicians, they are maintenance workers. They are, I mean, they're I don't want to say clergy, priests aren't normal, but they're normal people. And they literally, by their very vocation, are in the narthex. You see what I mean? Which gives them an authority to help others to learn to live in the narthex and to dwell there and to go into the world with a narthex mindset that is both the Lord God Almighty and the world that God so loved that he gave his only son. That's what we need deacons to keep doing, to keep us at that narthex consciousness, which I think is what Christmas is about. I'm getting into too much, but anyway, that's a whole other idea. But I think really, and I think that's, I don't think it's an accident. I could be wrong about this, but when I was a kid in the Episcopal Church, I mean, the Episcopal Church always did ways of service. It was schools, things like scouting and that kind of thing. And there were AA groups. I mean, we were very much involved in that, even in the earliest days. But recovery groups. And there have been a number of things, but growing up, I don't remember churches feeding hungry people. But they do now. I don't remember clothing closets. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and they do now. Even churches in poor communities, I don't remember. In the late 60s, there started to be an urban parish kind of thing where they were beginning the community centers and that kind of thing got going. I don't think it's an accident that the revival of the diaconate seems to happen at roughly the same time that the Episcopal Church turned outward. I don't think that's an accident. Now, what we have to do is make sure that the turn outward also has a journey inward. Because if it's just outward, you're going to run out of gas. But if it's inward and outward, as Elizabeth O'Connor used to say, the journey inward and the journey outward, it must be both. That's narthex. That's the crossing between the sanctuary and the street. And deacons have to take us there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody? Yes, Alan.
Hi, my name is Alan Murray. I'm from Trinity Cathedral. I'm a layperson, so I don't wear a collar, so I get to do a lot of things. But My question is that the recent racial justice audit of the Episcopal Church mentioned something about moving from transactional to transformational. And I'm really very interested in that thought about how do we move our anti-racism training from being transactional to transformational, because in our diocese, we do have requirement for certain governing bodies it's a requirement you have to take anti-racism training, but there's absolutely no requirement church-wide for vestry, for bishop committees, for search committees. And to me, those are positions of power that really requires that kind of work. So I'm really kind of curious of, give us some thoughts about how we can, I don't want to say require, because people don't respond well to requirements, but how do we invite people to want to do this work? Because you can sit in the midst of a whole body of vestry and they have never taken any classes or anything on anti-racism. You don't even have the vocabulary to articulate the vision of what it means to become a beloved community. So I see that as a very problematic, but how do we move into a model that is transformational? I know it's a very long question.
No, it's a good question. That's a big one. I mean, and it's not an easy answer. Because, I mean, you're right, requiring things of people beyond a certain level becomes problematic. It just does. And it's not just the Episcopal Church. I mean, I've got rabbi friends and imam friends, and it's the same thing. So this is clearly interfaith. These are human beings. This is a human thing. I think Americans have a particular, how should we say, spin on that, I think, but.
You're in Oregon. The state that embraces that.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. But it's pretty universal. It really is. And yet, one way to approach conceptually is how do we invite folk to opportunities and possibilities? Well, one, you got to have the opportunities and some concrete possibilities for them, ways for it. For example, and we've not done this. Now that I think about it, I mean, I'm thinking out loud, which is what extroverts do. But it occurs to me, beloved community training for vestries. You know what I mean? An invitation to vestries. You got to get clear. You got to be smart and strategic. How do you get the clergy and maybe the senior warden? Get them interested and willing. Just one person, no, two people. You never want to say one person. Usually two. Invite congregation and two people to a diocesan training, a workshop for vestries on racism training or whatever it happens to be, inclusion or whatever. I learned from being in a southern diocese that language was important. That I could get the same result using the right language, but if I used the wrong language, they said, "Oh, you've been up in New York again." But I do think, or even worse, they would say, "You've been out in California recently." That's even worse. Yeah. But I do think having programmatic opportunities that actually are designed for congregational leadership, whether vestries or whether, that actually makes a lot of sense. Inviting periodically, being strategic about inviting parish leadership, not, again, that leaves some agency on the person or on the community, to things like sacred ground, to have groups and figure out how do we invite leaders in congregations you have to be strategic, figure out how do we get them in a way that they can respond to. And also, I have to admit, sitting here thinking, I'm not aware that we've designed anything in these ways specifically for vestries. We know what vestries are like. They're pretty much the same. It's like 8 o'clock congregations. They're the same everywhere around the world. I mean, trust me. I was in Jerusalem at 8 o'clock service, and it wasn't even in English. And I said, it's the same crowd, just different language. But I do think focusing on how can we help them to hear and receive an invitation. It's not going to be everybody, but it will be a few. And that may be, and then they may help you figure out how do we go the next step. How do we, I'm not sure that and I can include myself in that, have really thought about that. That's where the grassroots really is. And that's how do we strategically get to where folk are and invite them to this particular well. And some will and some won't. That's okay. That's okay. But as I believe it's St. Paul in Corinthians who said, or in Romans, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Doesn't take a lot of yeast, just a little. And I think that's true. But you've given me an idea we're going to talk with canon spellers in our team about thinking about how do we tailor some of the designs we've already got. It's not like we got a lot of the materials, and make them accessible. When I say accessible, I mean usable, possibly for wardens conferences or you know what I mean, vestry folk conferences, and then let dioceses have that, and then let you all play with that. We've not done that before. Never thought about it till just now. But so if you do some of it here, we'll do some of it. Sharon, Chuck, we need to follow up on this because it's a good idea. Thank you for that. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but you answered mine. It's all right. That's a good.
I'm Charles McGee from Grace Memorial Episcopal Church. My question is, what is the Episcopal Church's position on reparation?
On reparations?
Yes, sir.
Well, I have to admit, I'm trying to remember what we did at the last General Convention, but I think what you're seeing is a movement in the church. I don't mean everywhere, but a movement in the church to find ways, and may use a variety of words. Reparation may be one word. Healing response is another one I've heard. Again, what communicates in one place may not communicate in another place, but the same fruit. The Theology Committee of the House of Bishops has been working on white supremacy theologically for a number of years, and finally produced it's a book, they published the book, on impacting and engaging white racism. And they talked in there about reparations, repairing the breach. There are a variety of ways you can say the same thing. And they gave some examples that are already in place in the Diocese of New York, for example, where they've made a decision and they use the word reparations. And Diocese of Maryland is another one that's done the same thing. The Diocese of Texas doesn't use the word reparations, but they've made the same kind of commitment and use different language to do it. But we say we're talking about repairing past hurts that still hurt today. That's the same thing. It's the same thing. Rose by any other name, it's still a rose. It's getting at what the word reparation is intended to get at. There was Virginia Seminary, which is our largest seminary. Now, and Virginia Seminary is, I've got to tell you, Virginia Seminary was a hospital for Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. And there's still a building. Is it Addison? Is that the one? Aspinall. What was actually used as a hospital for Confederate soldiers. Now, again, that seminary was a plantation-like. And there were black folk who were enslaved and who worked for little or nothing even after slavery. And Virginia Seminary decided we have done wrong and we got to do right. And we can't undo the past, but we can try to correct the present, and in so doing, maybe redeem the past. And so they've mounted a serious program. They've unearthed descendants, you know, and they're trying to do programmatic things that engage education for kids, and things that actually can help to repair the fruit of what was done in the past. You can't change the past, but you can repair the results of it. You can work at that and change the future, which is what reparations really are getting at. To repair the breach, as the prophet Isaiah said. How do we repair the breach, the wrong that has been done that continues to perpetuate itself? So that's a long way of saying that there's a movement going on in the church even as we speak about that. I asked our executive council last spring, or started talking at executive council. I said it's time for truth and reconciliation for the church, Episcopal Church structure. And I said, I say that in love. And this is not about beating anybody up. That's not how I roll. That's not what we're talking about. But we've got to, there's some truths that need to be told. And I said, for good or ill, you elected me presiding bishop, and you let a brother, a descendant of slaves, get in there, and I figured out where some stuff is. Okay. And I said, so there's some truth telling that needs to happen. And we've got a colonial history. I mean, we don't have the depth of colonial history that Great Britain has, but we got an American colonial history, and we've got it's in the Pacific, it's in parts of Asia, it's in Central and Latin America, it's even in parts of Europe, and was in parts of Africa, especially in Liberia. We actually, I mean, oh, is that home?
That's home.
That's home. All right. Yeah. I said, call your tribe. That's right. Name your tribe. And I'll give you an example. There are endowments that were attached to those from missionary days, and yet, I mean, I've asked the question, why are those endowments controlled? I mean, investment, that's one thing. And you're going to invest in banks. I get that. But why, how that money is expended? Why is that controlled by executive council? That feels like we're inadvertent. Nobody's intending to do it, but it just feels. So I just said, look, you elected me, so I'm just asking the questions. It just looked. I said, so let's have truth and reconciliation, because that's the beginning to face our past, whatever it is, and we do it together. You know, I'm a descendant of former slaves, but we do that together. Descendants of former slaves and descendants of former slave owners. And folk who had nothing to do with it at all. We're going to do this together. Look at our truth, see what it is, learn from it, repent of it, but then learn from it. Not to beat each other up, but tell the truth and then learn from it, and then turn. How can we take those learnings and translate them into something that helps us in the present and the future, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes in a new way? And that, I think that, so anyway, we got a group of committee to work, get it. The kingdom of God is coming. Episcopal Church said, oh, we'll form a committee to discuss it. I mean, anyway, it's like, and so, but we did. We got a really remarkable group of people. It was profoundly strategically diverse. I mean, indigenous Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, white folk, everybody. Anyway, we got everybody at the table. I mean, skilled folk, and said, y'all need to figure out, how does the church make a commitment to do this work and make a long-term commitment to healing our racial hurts across a variety of contexts, not just black and white, but across a variety of contexts. How do we, as a church-wide community, do that? And so I just called it Truth and Reconciliation. So they came back and said, well, that word reconciliation, people want to jump on that bandwagon too quick. And they said, can we talk about healing instead of, and so I talked to President Jennings, and we agreed, oh, okay, that's fine. Then they came back and said, well, we need a little bit more than truth. I said, oh, Lord, now what? They said, so can we have truth telling? I said, well, okay, I get that. So that's and then they came back again, and they said, now, we'd like to change it from truth and reconciliation to truth telling, reckoning, and healing. And President Jennings, at one point, we were talking about it. We agreed that, sure, fine, it's fine. She finally said, this is like Prince. You remember Prince?
Yes.
I remember when he changed his name, the one formerly known as Prince. He said, this is the committee formerly known as Truth and Reconciliation. Now it's Truth. And so that group went to General Convention and asked General Convention to make a commitment of a substantive amount of money, not tied just to the trienniums every 3 years, but a substantive, serious commitment of this church across generations so that it will outlast any presiding bishop, that it will go on for a long time. And everybody agrees it has to be done, but couldn't figure out, we've never done anything like that before, because we only budget for every 3 years. And you can't commit another general convention. Anyway, I said, look, I'm not the guy to figure out how to do it. I know you get the right smart people in the room together. You tell them to pray for the Holy Spirit to help them figure it out, and then they figure it out. But there's a way to do it. I've been around long enough to know if you want to do it, you'll get it done. And they're going to do it. And the convention said, we're going to do it. We're going to get this structure and the people in place and get this thing moving. And it's the Coalition for Racial Equity and Justice is what it's being named. And they'll figure that out. But in part embedded in that is some of the kind of work that reparations, repairing does. Truth-telling, figuring out how do we repair and how do we move forward together, and how do we do that. And I think that's the first time our church has done that as an Episcopal church. Dioceses have done it, institutions have done it, there are some congregations that have done it, but now the church-wide must model it. And I say that because part of it was, while we were talking about this, the burial grounds of indigenous kids at the boarding schools, well, we knew that was in Canada. Help me, church. It was right here, too. And that sort of emerged into our consciousness. So we got work to do, not to beat each other up, but we got work to do to hear the truth and then figure out how do we work together to build a new future. And that's the work of, that's what reparations is getting at. So the answer to your question is, we're on the cusp. I really do. I think our church is on the cusp of doing something that American society is going to need to do, but the church is going to get there first. And by the way, just as a side note, the Church of England's doing this. They're doing this. And last February, when we were at the Lambeth Palace for the meeting of the primates, the archbishops and the presiding bishops of the 39 or 40 churches that make up the Anglican Communion. So Archbishop of Canterbury calls us together, and so we meet, and we're called primates, and I always kind of think of monkeys. Anyway, in fact, I jokingly call it the Anglican Anthropological Association. So we were together at Lambeth Palace in London last February. No, March, I'm sorry, it was March. It was right after the House of Bishops meeting, last March. And they took us over to see a building that they had just built. It's like 8 or 9 stories. The Church of England gets government money, so they have a little bit more money than the rest of it. But they had built their archives. And part of the archival work that they're doing is on where the money that funds the Church of England, what of that money was tied to slavery. And a lot. We all know. It's Queen Anne's Bounty is what it's actually called. That actually is what it's called. And now they haven't figured out what do you do once you have knowledge, what you really know. But they actually have auditors. I've forgotten, archival auditors, I think, was that what it's called? Archival auditors who know how to do, because you got to do the audit trail to see what was the source, because this money was like, 17th, 18th century. So what was it for? Where did it come from? Was that tied to slavery, or was it, well, if it had to do with the West Indies, it was tied to slavery. Anything near Africa, it was tied to slavery. And anywhere in the Americas, indigenous people were probably removed from their land. You can pretty much bet, but they really want to do it right, and they're doing it. As we speak, they're doing that. So there's a movement afoot, and what the result will be. That's your bishop will be a bishop to see that. I'll be retired and sitting in my rocking chair. I'm going to get a dog when I retire, and I'm going to walk, and we're going to walk each other for.
So when is your term up?
2024,
2020.
the actual term. But don't worry, I won't quit
No,
working.
no,
I mean,
you'll still be a bishop.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna still do something. Yeah. Thank you. I gave you more than you asked for, but thank you.
Well, I want to thank Bishop Curry for responding to our questions, and
Incredible questions.
thank you, everybody.
Oh, thank you. They really are incredible questions.
They were.
Yes, they really are.